Hi everyone. So wonderful to see you all. Before I start, I just want to know from all of you, which session are you here for? Living a fulfilling life or end of life care? Both? Okay. Then we have a good audience here. Thank you so much.
So that means none of you can leave.
Yeah. So we will do a attendance check at the end of the second session to see how many of you gave an honest answer. Okay, so just before we kind of jump into the discussion today, I thought it would be a good idea to do a bit of context setting. Why we are here today and how did this topic come to us? So as Sandhya very kindly introduced us, Reshmi and I are co-founders of Silver Talkies and also co-authors of a book, Rethink Ageing. And just to give you a brief background in case you don't know, so Silver Talkies is a social impact organization that started working with older adults in 2014 with just the intention that aging should not really be bound by stereotypes that we have always bound it in. So it's our intention that aging should be all about having fun, growing older in a certain way which is active and of course happy and healthy. So we have been running a club called the Silver Talkies Club. In fact, in the audience you will find many people who are wearing a badge which says proud member of the Silver Talkies Club. So these are all members of the Silver Talkies Club who have just come together with a common goal of living an independent, active, and a happy life. So Reshmi and I had an opportunity to write a book by, we were given that opportunity by Penguin India. The book got published in October last year. It's called Rethink Aging, Lessons in Aging from the Older and Bolder Generation. The book actually is a synopsis of all that we have learned working with our members and or even observations at home of how things change as one grows older. And I don't think I need to really, kind of go deeper into that. But the book is structured around the different aspects of holistic well-being that WHO actually identifies as things that one should look at if you were wanting to age well, which includes not just your physical health. It talks about your mental well-being, your social and emotional well-being, your vocational and spiritual well-being as well. Did it stop? Yeah, it's working. Yeah. Okay. So the intention here with this panel and the discussion today was that while we have in the book kind of, listed a lot of things that we have come across, spoken to a lot of individuals who are actually setting examples of what aging can be all about. We really wanted to have a one-on-one discussion with people who are, from their own personal experiences and their personal philosophies, actually leading a very active, and I would call it an empowered and fulfilling life, right? And I think talking about life is incomplete if you do not talk about death. And death is a topic which we usually do not address at all. It's like the elephant in the room that's never even looked at. You just completely like an ostrich burying your head in the sand and not looking at it. So I would actually, for that, I have to thank Dr. Rajni Bhatt, who made that suggestion to us that why don't we include end-of-life care in our discussion, palliative care in our discussion. And I thought that was a brilliant idea to make this conversation complete today. So without further ado, let me just quickly introduce the very esteemed guest speakers we have here on the panel today. I'm sure you have read their profiles already on the website and the invites. But I'll just take a quick minute. So Shiv is a senior advocate with Karnataka High Court. He has been a senior rights activist for the longest time, has 50 years of experience behind him working in the whole space. He was very instrumental in setting up the elderly helpline in Bangalore with the Bangalore police. And he's now a very well-known mediator. He spends a lot of time at the mediation office trying to settle cases outside the court. So he does an exemplary work around elderly rights. So thank you, Shiv, for joining us today. Tara, I think I need not spend too much because she has a lot of friends around here. How many of you know Tara already? See, friends in the house. So Tara is a well-known educationist. She's a musician. She's the founder director of a music group called Sunaad that she started at the age of 49, right? And she still is on the advisory boards of many educational and music institutes, including the Shankar Mahadevan Academy. So Tara, welcome. Pankaj also here has many friends in the house. Hands up.
I think it's 1/3.
Yeah, I think you're equally.
The only one who doesn't have friends.
So Pankaj here is currently Chief Data Analytics Officer at Aditya Birla Group. He's had a very prolific career, corporate career. What he is most well known for is his networking skills. He is known as the go-to person. If you need to identify someone who can help you out, please reach out to Pankaj in the corporate world. Right, Pankaj? Am I right in saying that? Yeah. Non-corporate also. Okay, he's corrected me on that. So he's here, available for any leads. So yeah, so that's the panel for here for your first session. Amongst the audience right now, I have Dr. Nagesh Simha and Dr. Roop Gursohani, who flew in specifically from Mumbai all the way for this session. Thank you so much. So let's get on here with our first topic, right? We wanted to know what does it really mean to lead an empowered and fulfilling life in your 50s. So if I were to ask you this question, and in one sentence, in your mind, which is the most important ingredient, most important component to lead a fulfilling and an empowered life, especially in your post your 50s? You have the mics right in front of you.
I'm the only lady, so they're going to say ladies first. And yeah, so I would say the most important thing for me has been the freedom that I have to do the things that I love. You know, I've been very fortunate that even when I was working as a teacher, and I had and I taught music as well as physics. So I just had the fun of doing both, and I loved them. So I can't say I didn't do what I didn't love, even at that time. But now, since maybe 50s, 60s, I have had the space to devote my time entirely to music, which is a very important part, and through music, spirituality. So, spiritual pursuits. Yeah.
That empowers.
Yeah, that is for me the most important thing. Yeah.
Well, you asked for a single sentence. I think if we move away from denial to acceptance, that is the most fulfilling. Acceptance. And that's it.
You know, for me, I think it's a sense of community. So there are several communities that I'm a part of, whether it's the office one, running, cycling, many others, and a sense of, contribution through those communities. So I think to me, those are the two things which define.
Very interesting, very different answers. And I think combined together, if you were to assimilate all of it, you actually have the right ingredients all packed together.
It actually means there's nothing wrong in growing old.
Nothing at
That's
all.
all it means.
That's all it means. Yes.
We also don't have a choice, right?
You're right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So Tara, let's begin with you for this. Obviously, music defines a large part of your life, but it's also this community that you have been able to create with it. And you've actually had a journey in music that started very early. You were very, very young. I think you told us you were 9 or something at that time. And then you set up Sunaad at 49. You know, how defining has, if you were to add right now, I won't publicly tell your age unless you want.
I'm 69.
Wow, brilliant. Awesome. So, see, I didn't want to take that up. So, at 69, what is it that really keeps you going? What is it that completely defines your life?
So, yes, music is a very, very big part of it. But as I said, it is also, spiritual sadhana, if I may say so. And if you ask me about meditation, my friends here will tell you that I can barely meditate. I sit down and the mind is all over the place. It's difficult, but if I sit down to sing, then there are very few other thoughts that ever come into the mind, when you are concentrating, you're singing. So that is the easiest path for me to meditation, my form of getting into that. And therefore, music has been a support throughout for the spiritual path, which is the most important thing in my life now. I mean, the spiritual path is the most important thing. If you were to say, what is it that you can give up? I can give up everything else.
Including music. But
if I need to, but
spirituality.
yeah, I hope that won't be asked of me. But yes, then what really matters is the path. And the path is, while you're talking of giving up, the path is also inclusive of everything that you're doing. Nobody's saying you need to go to the forest to be able to do this. You live your life as it is, but there is that feeling all the time, of wanting to be connected.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember when we spoke to Tara first, she said, when I'm practicing Drupad, that is my true sadhana. And that probably defines it for so many of us. So Tara, again, continuing with you for now, you started Sunaad almost at 50. And you told us you learned driving also at 50.
Yes. I was very proud of the fact because my brother, can I say it now? Yeah. My brother said, "You've got the license to kill now?" That's how encouraging people are. And I was petrified behind the wheel, but anyway. Yeah, so I got my license when I was 50.
But why it's important? Because we still hear things like, "Is umar mein ye sikhoge?" Maybe not in this audience, but generally people do hear things like this. Oh, you're going to study at this time. You're going to take this up. You're going to start a business, whatever it may be. And when we were speaking to Tara, I think Nidhi and I were finding it hard to keep up with the number of things she does. And so many of them happened once she, reached this so-called retirement age as such. So Tara, we want you to speak a little bit about that.
About what? Now which?
About being this constant learner that you seem to be.
Okay, so I think that's part of being a teacher. When you're a teacher, you need to be learning to understand the whole process of teaching and learning. And that's been fascinating for me. So I've just been a lifelong learner, and I have to be learning something. Otherwise, I feel, aaj ka din gaya. So I am now learning German. So because my daughter is in Germany and my grandsons are constantly talking to each other in German. So I have to at least know what topic they are on, so just to keep abreast of them. So now when they keep saying aber, I know it means but, so... So I've picked up enough to at least get on to what they're doing, So I've been teaching myself German on this wonderful Duolingo app. So I just find it fascinating to keep learning. And even, Drupad, I have the great fortune of receiving lessons every week from Umakant Gundecha-ji, who is, really such an embodiment of Drupad. And it's online. But it is just, every time I finish that 1 hour with him, I say, I've just been in heaven. It is so completely consuming, that whole hour. I cannot afford to not concentrate even for a second during that whole hour. So I just love that process of learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tara.
Shiv, I'll come to you now. You have been part of the book. You have been quoted in the book. And what you shared with us was that very early on in your life, and I think you mentioned at the age of 27, you had made these conscious choices about being beyond just being a lawyer. So I'm just curious, what was that thought process? One, what prompted you to really think about such things at an age when everybody, when people are generally trying to ace their careers or relationships? So what led you to really think consciously about what do I want to do just beyond being a lawyer?
That at the outset is a very tricky question. And at the risk of condemning myself, I'll have to be very careful when I answer that question. But Tara, just a word about what you said. The only difference between what you do and what I do is you meditate and I mediate. That's about all that I do. That's the only thing that both of us are doing. You are resolving conflicts within yourself. I am resolving conflicts outside of myself into the other people. But anyway, to come back to what you said. See, by the time I reached the age of 27, there were a lot of things that had happened to make me realize that there is a class of people who are beyond 27. You will never remain 27 for the rest of your life. And these things included something very morbid, like attending funerals, like cremating bodies, and so on and so forth, of youngsters. It's a very morbid thing. But nevertheless, that did strike in me a chord and saying, look, you are going to be there one day. So how long are you going to be a lawyer? You can't be a lawyer earning for the rest of your life, and for what do you earn? And the turning point came when I realized that I would be in that position at some point of time. That was the trigger point. And you had your old parents around you, you had your old uncles and aunts around you, looking at what they were undergoing because of the earlier fact I mentioned, that they were not in an acceptance mode. The denial showed itself in the form that I can still do what I did at the age of 18. And that conflict, that suffering, that pain is what made me realize that I should not fall into the same trap. So therefore, let me look at life differently. Let me segmentize my life into what's called the fun life. And at 27, it was the beer life and pub life and so on and so forth. And then you moved into the more responsible family life. And then I said, after that, settle down to helping others, because that's where they need it. And that's where the trigger was. That's why I went into the helpline process also. Because again, if I have another minute, the realization dawned then that what you individually go through in your life and is the same that several other people are undergoing through your life. They don't have the means to repair it. I have found the means to repair it, and therefore I should be on that side and not on this side. I don't know whether it answers your question, but...
No, I think that's a very powerful thing to be thinking about at that age. I'm not sure how many of us in this room actually had that kind of awareness to be thinking at 27 about what I want to do with my life beyond just working and probably, as he said, having beers and going to the pubs.
Yes, but there's a caveat. I got married at 24, so I had 3 years of married life. So there were 3 years of fun life, yeah.
But do you want to even share with us what were the choices that you had made for yourself? Because you chose to go and get into theater, you did a lot of other things. So you want to talk about that?
I went into theater irrespective of this recognition, taking cognizance of this fact. I had always been interested in theater. I was always interested in music. I had my family who my sisters were learning music. So it was not a case of getting into theater because of old age. It was a case of having got into theater and expanding the scope of theater when you went into that age. Because as she pointed out, learning theater at the age of 60 is a near impossibility. Therefore, I even forgot your question. You said, how did you go into theater?
What were the choices you made?
I made the choice that theater is some place where I can look at the other side of life. See, a script is what? It's a fiction. It's a play, it's an imaginative play. So you're able to get yourself, transpose yourself to the other world and look at the world from the other side. That is what prompted me to move into theater. Music, as she points out, is bliss. I tried it. Not very many people appreciated it. That's a different matter altogether. But then the throat gave way, so I had to give up that, the music part of it. But these choices are made only when you're in a mood and you're willing to say, I'm willing to look at something new. And not be in the comfort zone of where you are. If my life is going on so smoothly, my bills have been paid, my breakfast is taken care of, my dinner is taken care of, my entertainment is taken care of, why do I bother to look beyond? That is the fundamental recognition I'm talking about. And that awareness has to come only if you make a conscious choice to look beyond.
Right. And I think that, that takes a lot of inner exploration to really know.
It does.
It does,
It
right?
does.
And I think you did another pivot in your early 50s when you decided to go the whole mediation route, right? Beyond what you were doing inside the court, you decided to really do it another way. What was the thinking then?
See, mediation ultimately is a process of conflict resolution. I had already practiced law for 35 years and realized what an ass I was. Yeah, because they say law is an ass. And you can imagine what a greater ass I must have been to have practiced that law for 35 years of my life. The law saw conflict and resolution by a third person who had no idea what conflict is about, but looked at law and the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. So the conscious choice made was, there are people suffering out there. They go to the judicial system to get what they think is justice, not what the law thinks is justice. Therefore, it's an individual concept of fairness and justice that I'm thinking of. And the judicial system cannot provide that because you're bound by the constraints of the law. Therefore, I stepped back and said, let's try this mediation, which is a party-driven process, which gives you the platform to determine what you want and what makes you happy. Create a platform for a dialogue and see whether there could be some kind of a collaborative effort at enduring peace for both. And that because I had seen suffering on the other side. The sheer frustration of people who are unable to get any justice from us, the courts, that frustration is unbelievable. I'm sure, I hope not, there are not very many people here who have suffered the justice system. I hope not. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hands because then you will say I'm looking for business. No, I'm not. So, very briefly put, that's what it is.
No, I think that's very empowering. I think that attitude, that awareness, that exploration, it does really need a lot of self-reflection.
Yes. And finally, Nidhi, it is the fact that you begin to consider yourself not as important as the other person. This is where focus has to shift from within you to outside of you. And this can happen at 27, it can happen at 28, it can happen at 60, or it can never happen at all. But that depends on how receptive you are to the world around you. Today, I can probably identify half a dozen people who are undergoing some kind of a pain or the other. The face tells me that. So you have to be alive, you have to be alert, your antennas are to be up. It doesn't matter what your age is.
Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you so much. So, Pankaj, we move on to you. From the conversation Nidhi and I had with you earlier, it seems like complete opposite of what Shiv was talking about, that very conscious planning for age, if I can call it that. In your case, you told us that you make decisions by the process of elimination. You live in the moment. It's something, Ritu, we also spoke about. You live in the moment. So how does that work for you, especially at a stage in life when, this is typically the time when people look at planning for the future and things like that. So how does that work out for you?
Yeah, I think I build models of what I have done in retrospect once things have happened. And the only reason that might be happening is, compared to other stories that I hear, is that there are inflection points that happen in people's life which make them think and do something about it or whatever. It appears to me that either nothing happened or I didn't notice it, and I just went with the flow. So to some extent, the way I look at it, and by the way, I'm 54, so we have people from different decades, and they made sure that there are people in the 50s and 60s and 70s or whatever to make sure there's a diverse panel and diverse this thing. So I was born on the day Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, Apollo. So I think I would say that the reason many of these things didn't happen, I probably was just a privileged guy. I mean, that generation, being a male, upper caste, IIT, IIM, getting good job, life was a breeze. So I don't think there was any force coming upon us. Only till the age of 18, when my dad, who was an engineer, forced me and my brother that you have to get to IIT, is what we were under a lot of pressure, that you have to get there. And after that, I think he left us alone. And then I didn't take the burden of all of these adjectives. So since you are, let's say, IIT or IIM or whatever, you are expected to be something. I said, boss, I think I have hit the base level, so I don't need to worry about anything else. So I took my life in the way I felt it was. So therefore, it was always in the moment. I got married to Ritu at the age of 26. I was on the youngest in my batch to get married. And we would hang around with my friends, and she would say, till when will you remain a bachelor? Right? Yeah, she's right here. So we didn't have a car, and my friends had cars. So I said, we have to rely on them. So we have to call them. Then they'll pick us up and take us around and all that. So that was the excuse. But later on also, I suspect I remained a bachelor in my mind. She stopped talking about that. And because what is a bachelor? The name I think suggests that you're not thinking too much about the future, too much about many other things. But I think the reason we have survived well is because she has thought about all of those things. So together as a family, we have sort of figured things out. And I have agreed with all of what she has said, because since I wasn't thinking about it, and so I said, okay, since you are thinking about it, we'll just go with whatever your
So
thought.
we must tell you, we actually asked him this question, does Ritu agree with you on this approach? He said, no, Ritu takes care of the rest.
Yes. Yeah, and many people, and Arun and many others, and many of us have had a very privileged life, and if you didn't think about things, things happen to you, because the default hypothesis was that you are smart, unless you made a fool of yourself. So therefore, life was always good that, there are some of my ex-colleagues, ex-bosses sitting here, they would assume that this guy must be smart till proven guilty. So I got the next job, I got the next this thing. So that's fine. And so I got into jobs which, people would have otherwise not gotten, because people assumed that. So that's what I say, that, the benefit of a good education is that people assume that you are smart till proven guilty. So just get that. People ask me, is there value in some degrees? I said, the only value is that you have a good default hypothesis to start with. And then it's up to you to, prove them wrong. So that's what my, life has been. I have moved around careers, moved around things. I think over time I have picked up many other, activities like, running and cycling and other types of social communities. So I think I just enjoy, like I said, community and contribution are the defining features. When I look back, it wasn't as if I tried to do that, but when I look back, that is what has happened. And why it has happened, it's hard to say. Maybe there were some role models in my family. There were lots of go-givers, if I can say, in my, grandparents, and maybe I just picked that and said, okay, jo mera hai, wo tera hai, like you said, life will, let's look at it from others' perspective. हमारे पास तो सब कुछ है, हमें क्या चाहिए? तो जो करना है किसी और के लिए करो. So if you have to make a contribution, it can't be for yourself, because you have everything. And if you are living in the moment, you are anyway not aspiring for anything else. So what do? You help others. So everything is by elimination. कि जब अपना नहीं है तो किसी और का ही कर लेते हैं, चलो करना तो कुछ है.
That's a very, very interesting perspective. Maybe some of us can even try it out. So Pankaj, do you ever see yourself retiring in that, traditional sense of the term? What do you see yourself, doing?
Yeah,
Maybe.
so people many times tell me that, when will you retire? So for me, every job is also an opportunity to utilize that platform to do a bunch of other things which was not written in the JD. So I have interpreted any opportunity as, okay, so these guys have given me a job. They want something, I'll give it to them. But that should be 10% of what I'll do with this job. 90% will be things otherwise, which will eventually somewhere, help the company and help the group also. But I'll interpret my job in my own way. So I have utilized every job as an opportunity to, do things for others, or for the community, for the team, for the group, or whatever. So that's how it is. So for me, retirement will happen when it happens. We have a retirement age of 60. So by the way, I work for the Aditya Birla group, work in the data science team. So maybe I'll retire at 60, I'm 54. At that time, what I will do, even I don't know. I'm involved in many other things. All my jobs have, by the way, happened because someone called me. And there are a few people here who have called me to the next job. So maybe someone will call me for my next calling. It may not be a job, and I'll just follow that, because so far things have worked out. I have no reason to believe it will not work out. And I also believe that you put me somewhere, I'll create a community and a purpose out of it. Whether it's a job, put me in Sweden tomorrow, I'm quite happy to figure it out. You put me out of everything, I'll create it. So I have that belief and confidence that wherever you put me in that context, I'll figure something out.
So it's wonderful to know and see this kind of confidence. But asking this question for many people, because they do grapple with this at a time when they are probably expected to retire. And it's a very different kind of life stage. So how important do you think is retirement planning in today's day and age, given how much our social structures are changing? We are no longer the same kind of urban India that we were maybe, say 30, 40 years ago. So how do you see it for people who do not have your kind of confidence?
So there are two parts to retirement. Since I'm a MBA, all my finance MBA people, we used to create an Excel sheet of how much is my net worth, how much do I need to retire? Because, when I sort of graduated, they said, we should retire at 40. All these crazy bankers who, you hear about. So those were my peer group, and they would make Excel sheet so that they could retire early. So since I was also at that time young, I also had a sheet, Excel sheet. It would call net worth 2010 or something like that. Every year it will get updated to make sure that, I'm making progress to my financial goals so that I can retire like everyone else. Then I think at some point in time, my dad retired, I think 2005-06. And after 5-6 years, he made a will. And he had retired from a government job with barely some 90 lakh or some such thing as a provident fund. And that money had actually grown. I said, my dad was a middle class guy, retired with one provident fund. He's not even reducing it, it's only growing. Why do I need all this? I'm earning much more than him, I'm saving much more than him. And by that time, I had also established that my spending and desire to spend wasn't growing. So my children were going to NPS and, Christ College and not to Stanford. My wife was not asking for a, holiday in Switzerland every year. My child was not saying we want to buy that Mercedes-Benz that someone else bought. So no one was doing any of those things. And we were staying in the same apartment for the last 18 years. So I figured out based on data that, this trend is going to continue. And this whole saving will take care of myself. So I said, why do I have to need to? So I stopped making that net worth sheet after that. I said, this net worth is not important. I think we'll figure out, just like my dad figured out. I don't have many, needs which are there. So that's one part of it. I think today, I think the more important part of it, at least in this audience, will be, how do you keep yourself engaged and motivated? So I think many a times to get to the financial goal, I suspect many of my peers pigeonhole themselves into their job so much that the only thing that they know and only identity that they have is of their job. And when you take the fish out of water, then they don't know what to do with it. So I think somewhere one has to reflect on, say, what do I stand for? What is my identity? I think early on, our identity is given by others. They tell you who you are. By the way, when we think it's our identity, but all our identity at the early age is shaped by someone else. You are too smart, or you are beautiful, or you are this, or you are that. I think over time, it's up to us to find our own inner purpose, to start breaking out that external identity given to us and form our own real identity, which, to your point, maybe some people never do. But I think that's what I think we are expected to do. And once you are sure of what you are doing, other people accept that identity as well. So over time, I think, at least I feel that my ecosystem understand me and accept me for who I am. They don't want to define me as any of those identities of a corporate person or an analytics person or whatever. They know what dimensions I stand for, and they're happy with it, I'm happy with it. So I think if each of us can reflect and live with whatever we think is right and tell our ecosystem this is what it is, I think people are quite happy to accept you. But I think the fear of rejection happens, and I think many a time that happens because you're not sure of it yourself. So I think as you experiment and become sure of yourself, I think everyone else is very happy to accept you.
Thank you. That was a very important perspective. In fact, when we were working on our book, the many seniors that we spoke to, sorry for saying seniors, we call them older adults, and this was a point that came up repeatedly, what Pankaj just spoke about. So thank you, Pankaj.
And I think the keywords there was acceptance, again, what Shiv was referring to, and also finding that purpose, right, which all of you have been alluding to, right? So Tara, I just want to
say one more thing. This purpose thing is being talked about by companies and, the whole wide world. And I talk about it in, and I have lots of youngsters, interns, and they'll say, but what is purpose? So I have come up with a definition of purpose, which is to say, whatever activity, when you are involved in it, you don't want money for it, you are just involved in it. It could be cricket, it could be music, it could be this Lego block that you are playing with, and that's fine. You don't have to have an esoteric, altruistic purpose, because purpose seems to signify some very big thing which only big people or senior people have. I say everyone can be involved in something that just consumes them. So that can happen through experimentation. And today there are so many opportunities. So I tell them, guys, just experiment. There's frugal experimentation is possible. You can figure out. We didn't have the opportunity to do those things. My dad said, was doctor or engineer. That, frog ran away when I was trying to die. I said, the biology to hoga nahi, to chalo engineer kar lete hain. And things like that. So I think all our decisions in my life was based on elimination. We engineer nahi hai, acha wahan engineering samajh mein nahi aayi, to chalo MBA kar lete hain. उसके बाद 2 नौकरी मिली, one to sell light bulbs for Wipro, one to do PowerPoint in a AC environment. I chose the latter because light bulb for Wipro धूप में जाना पड़ेगा. So life में शादी के लिए ऋतु से मिले, लोगों ने बोला कुछ गड़बड़ है क्या? नहीं, तो कर लो शादी, तो कर ली, अच्छी चल गई. So so I think all our lives have been just by elimination and things have worked out. So आज इन लोगों के पास so much choices there that they get very confused. 100 dimensions and 100 choices, they mental illness तो होगा ही होगा. So unless you find your own conviction through experimentation, if you try to find trends, which was required in our time, they don't need to try and find trends. They can create trends. So I keep telling them that, guys, don't follow the mental model that your parents are telling you, which was trend spotting. You can be the trend setter. Because अभी तो कुछ भी trend बना सकते हो. There are so many dots out there. You just connect whichever. We had 2 dots. One didn't like us. One we didn't like. What to do?
1 minute. While I see the point that you're making, I'm not sure how many people in this space actually can afford that experimentation. That's a very, very singular factor. We are here talking about a segment of society which is otherwise fulfilled. There are no needs. If you move to a different segment of society, the cost of experimentation is so huge that the purpose becomes absolutely imperative. I mean, I'm talking to you from my experience of the Elders Helpline, because there we used to deal with BPL, not the haves. Absolute guys who had to sell something to eat their food, that level of economic activity. So to them, there has to be a purpose for whatever you do. It cannot be anything more than that. But the point is taken. Those of us who are privileged can afford this experiment, certainly. And to them, I think your answer is perfect. Guy, don't waste don't hold back, move ahead. But if there are people who have no option, then what do we do?
So absolutely great point. So I was in Bangalore. I said the same thing. There was a student sitting there. He said, I come from a very rural area, and you talk about the abundant society versus this thing. I don't think we have abundance all over. So I said, I have lived in that abundance for lonely. That's all I know. So all my thoughts and ideas are from that perspective. So you have to imagine that this is only appealing to those people who can relate to my context. It absolutely doesn't. And my context is 1% of the society. 99%, I have no clue who they are. I don't even know how my maids and drivers' lives are. So clearly, to your point, since I move around in a society which is the 1% of the society, I'm appealing to them in their language, where they have the opportunity to experiment. 99%, like I said, I have no clue.
No, you're perfect. I'm saying if even that 1%, I'm sorry, am I taking your time?
No, I actually
You give me a
understand
mic and an audience, I'll never stop. This is the problem. Your point is taken. If those 1% are able to extend their experimentation to the other side of aging, well, your problem is solved.
No, that's a very fair point. In fact, I think, I was going to ask you the same question which Shiv did. So Shiv, thank you for taking that question on behalf of me. No problem
I
at all.
prepared, but I took it off.
No.
And I think all of us have to give experiences based on what we have experienced. And I, like I said, I've had a hugely privileged upbringing, although my dad was middle class and all of that. But still, compared to the rest of the country, I think we were in the top 1%, So therefore, I say, this is my experience in the world that I lived in. It obviously will not be applicable to if you are a woman. I haven't lived in your shoes, so I can't be 100% sure.
In fact, I have the same question for Tara now. Tara, my question to you is, since you interact with people across the spectrum, different age groups, with your, since you teach as well and you're on all these educational institutions, do you think women and men react or deal with aging differently?
I don't know, but the thing is, I wouldn't make a gender division in this. Mm-hmm. But I do know that my feeling, again, as Pankaj just said, I can only speak from my experience. I feel women are much stronger when it comes to, and men are pretty dependent on the women in their lives to manage the aging process, or to manage an empty nest, or to manage. And usually when the woman goes and the man is alone, he finds it, I think, much more difficult than when the woman is alone and, she can somehow integrate into the family or find something to do on her own, live independently. It's just coming to the very basic of being able to cook for yourself. The men, especially in our age group, now there are quite a few who can cook, but my father couldn't make a cup of tea. you know. That generation, he would have been lost if my mother hadn't been around, you know. So, and he was so dependent on my mother for everything. So it's different. My husband is completely independent. You know, he doesn't need me on that thing at all, which is good, you know. So it's changing, but even so, I would still feel that women are strong in a very different way from the way men. You can't generalize
No, in
for
fact, I
50%
would-
of the population.
No, but I would
Before you begin, I'm sorry, I'm going to intervene. There are two things here. One, this phenomena is so prevalent because women are caregivers. Men are caretakers, receivers. This is the problem with us. This is the essential problem with us. We are so used to receiving care from wives or spouses or whatever, we are lost. Okay? Second, on the lighter side, old men, aged men, look at younger women differently than they would an elder person. Truism of life. That was your question. How would they react? An elder man will look at a younger woman differently than he would an old woman. That's how they would react. You know what I'm talking about?
You want to elaborate?
The kind of sympathy that an aged man or a senior citizen or whatever you want to call them,
Right.
a young person would generate a different kind of sympathy and empathy from that person rather than an old person. It's a very naughty comment, but nevertheless, that's the truth. This is what we have seen. In my life, this is what I have seen.
Yeah, there is
So the
something.
day men become caregivers, believe me, things will change.
Well, that's a very fair point again, because I think that's an observation that we have had, even with our work since 2014. That in fact, for the longest time, our club had only women, and there were hardly any men. And it's only now that we have seen that change. In fact, it still happens that many of our meetups, many of the activities that we conduct, whether it's a theater workshop, whether it's a travel, anything at all, it's mostly women who come out and experiment with new stuff. That holds true even for things like tech literacy, wanting to learn about technology, wanting to learn about finance, wanting to learn about legal issues. So I don't think it's even the topic that really matters. It's just by default, women seem to be more experimental and outgoing, or I think they do better at being those lifelong learners that Tara was talking about in the beginning. That's been our experience, so I think that holds true, now that Tara also spoke about it. In fact, Rash, we can actually, I think,
And Nidhi, I had learned cooking also at 27, by the way.
You had learned cooking too? How wonderful. So, Shiv, I want to come back to you with this question, given that this topic came up, right? Bereavement, loss of spouse, right? For you specifically happened very early on in your life, and you were still in your early 50s.
Yeah.
How did you really cope with that? Because it's a reality, right? You cannot avoid it. It can happen to anyone, anytime, and that's why I think we're going to speak about death also in the second session, right? The choices that you made, say at 27, do you think they held you in good stead when that happened?
Absolutely, no question about it. No question about it. There were other things I could do rather than sit at home and mope. And again, that's where the denial to acceptance mode. Accept that it's going to end at some point of time, be it for me or be it for my spouse. Well, it's a long, painful journey, but when you have other avenues where you can direct your energies and whatever little talent you have, it tends to reduce and mitigate the pain that you have. I don't know whether Ashish is here. Munira? There he is. See, this is one man. Sit down, Ashish.
Is it the theatre connection?
Yes, it's the theatre connection. As they say, the theatre. The theatre connection. See, the theatre connection, I had received all the platitudes by the time. I mean, what do you hear? you are strong, you're brave, I know you're brave, I know you're this, you can handle this, etc., etc. None of that came. Where are you? Ashish was the man who came and said, let's do a play. That was it. So whatever interest we had and had developed by the time, that is what stood me in good stead. Believe me, he did. But the painful journey continues. Yes.
But I do remember in the book, there is a quote that we have from your interview with Resh, where you said that for the longest time while you were grieving, right, I think you snapped out of it when you were in this mode that, why did it happen to me? And when somebody asked you, why not you?
Yes. In fact, I asked the same question of lots of people. Why me? That guy just looked at me and said, why not you? What's wrong with you? What's so special about you? What's so special? And I think you're right. That was the one that sort of
Kind of snapped you out of that whole mode. So in the interest of time...
I just want to
Hanji.
make a
Yeah.
comment on what Shiv just said about theatre coming into... You know, it's just... Whether it's theatre or it's music, any of the arts, whether it's visual art, performing art, any of the arts, you know, it is a form of expression which enables you to not just cope with everything that's happening, but also connects you to the best part of yourself. You know, so I just struck me when how that helped. You know.
Right. So, given that we are, we have to move on to our second session very shortly, I think we can take about 2 or 3 questions from the audience if somebody has a question for the speakers here. Does anybody have a question? Okay, no questions here. So, Shiv, no, so we will ask Tara and Shiv about this as a closing question, right? Based on your experience, if you were to list 3 takeaways for anybody who is kind of still figuring out their aging process, or based on your experience, Shiv, since you have worked with a lot of older people, right? What would be those 3 key messages that you would want to leave the audience with? In what should you bear in mind in terms of how to plan and how to deal with your life?
As usual, ladies first, ma'am.
That's very, very neat device. Okay.
Trust me, I'm a lawyer 51 years.
I know. I cannot argue with that. So, I don't know if you will agree with me on this at all, or if it's at all a takeaway that is going to help anybody. But, sometimes we have very realistic dreams, right? We get up from this dream and we say, ooh, thank God I wasn't in it really. Thank God it was just a dream. So the point is, this life is also a dream. It's a long one. And we will wake up from this at some point. So why are we getting so entangled in it? What is the point of planning? What will be, will be. Que sera, sera, right? I'm not saying be fatalistic. There's always this thing of saying, are you being fatalistic? No. But I've realized that nothing, absolutely nothing is in my hands. I've had this very strong realization, as I told you. And therefore, just enjoy the moment. I think he's got it. Regardless of whether you are in the privileged class or you have to think about your next meal, enjoy that moment. And just be there, enjoy what is there, because kal kya hone wala hai, kisko malum? Agle kshan mein kya hone wala hai, we don't know, so enjoy the moment.
So beautifully said.
One thing I want to say is, I am often accused of being an extrovert and saying, yaar, tumhare liye chalta hai, you go talk to random strangers and you make friends and you do things. What about me, who's an introvert? So my brother, by the way, is the exact extreme. I think he has 2 friends. One of them is his wife. The other one, I don't know. And he lives in the US. So I think you can, stay that anonymity that, no one troubles you. And here it's very hard for him to, I think, come back and be with that. So I think, look at, Nek Chand made a garden in 30 years alone. That Manji guy cut some mountain. you can adopt a child. I mean, there are so many things that an individual who has no wanting to connect to many other people can do. So my view is, I think if you think and talk and find out, you'll find, and it doesn't have to be one thing. I think we all will, live for many years. So we should just continue to experiment and find some meaningful pursuits. And I think today, like nobody before, I think there's so many opportunities. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago it was so hard, but today I think opportunities out there. I think you are spoiled for choice. So I think everyone can just experiment and find something to do. I don't know. That's my thing.
My turn.
Yes.
I'm so glad that Tara is not an advocate on the other side. I'm arguing with her. It's impossible to counter that argument, the live for the moment and so on and so forth. There are three things that I've actually, some of this may sound very pedantic to you, some of it may sound very, very morbid also to you. The first thing is, in the grieving situation you're talking about, right? Please remember, at least that's been my experience, there is nothing wrong in thinking about yourself. Don't be ashamed to think about yourself, what you need, what you want, what gives you joy, and what gives you pleasure. Our traditional concept of life has always been live for your family and your children. Therefore, we are constantly making adjustments and sacrifices for what we believe will pay us in our next life. We don't even know whether that life exists. So first takeaway from me to all of you out of experience is, do not feel ashamed or reticent to say, look, I want to do this. Whether I can do it or not is a different matter. You can't run a marathon of 50 kilometers. Let's be honest about it. But you can, if you want to, go for a walk, or you can do whatever other things you want to do. Let not public comment and family comment come in the way of doing that. Please recognize that you have the right to do so. But be careful to what extent you extend that right. Do not get into a situation where you convert it into a legal right and land up in a court of law. That is not what I mean. That's not what I mean. I mean, you have the right to be yourself, so please be yourself. Second, integration and change with changing times is a very, very critical feature as far as I'm concerned. If we remain where we are and expect the circumstances to change to suit you, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So let's be realistic. Let's move out of the denial mode and say these are things that I cannot do. These are things that are inevitable. I will happily accept them and mold my life the way I should, because there are things I just cannot. The third and most important, which all of you will probably hate me for, please put your affairs in order. Please put them in order. And I'm not soliciting business for making a will, but please do put your affairs, properties in order. Because that is the constant worry of a senior citizen today, saying, what after me? What after me is nothing. You're not there. Don't worry about it. You will not even be there. There are people who have come to us saying, but what will happen to this after me? I said, how does it concern you? You're not even going to be there. You're not even going to see what's going to happen. But that thought within them actually cripples them in their daily life. So please put your affairs in order. Put your finances in order. Do what you want to do. You want not to give a property to anybody whom you don't like? Don't. But put it in a will. Your daughter is married a different caste guy. You don't want to give anything? Don't. Make a will. But please put your affairs in order. Then I have found emotional satisfaction in putting everything in order and in telling people where things are, so that after me there is not chaos. At least the children are happy that the father left behind not chaos, but property.
So I've got a friend who's going to take care of all my saris. And
I'm available. I'll give you my card.
And somebody who's going to take care of all the jewelry, the junk jewelry. And that's all that's needed to be sorted. Bas, अपन के पास और कुछ है ही नहीं, तो मजे में जाएंगे. So that leads to the next talk.
Thank you so much for this engaging and very humorous. You made it very light-hearted. So thank you so much for that. It was brilliant. And Shobha, can we just... Small memento for you. Sarah, that's your book. Yeah, you can compare notes outside the room. Thank you so much. We will just take a 5-minute
Just want to
break.
say a big
Hanji.
thank you to Nidhi and Reshmi for such a lovely opportunity. And the amount of trouble they took to put it together, I think they've done it in such a nice way that we had nothing to get tense about. Yeah, ye yaad rakhna hai, wo yaad rakhna hai, kuch nahi. Yeah, so it
Tara,
was
to
good
prove
fun.
my point, she's such a lovable person.
So sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Shiv. So next we have Dr. Roop and Dr. Nagesh. So we will have Dr. Roop giving us a talk about advanced care planning, and then we'll get into a discussion with Dr. Nagesh and Dr.
So, hello everyone. May I please request everyone to take their seats again? We have a very interesting session lined up now, so if you all could please take your seats. It's our pleasure to have Dr. Roop Gursahani and Dr. Nagesh Simha for the second panel, which is Navigating End-of-Life Care. And Dr. Gursahani has a very interesting presentation on that lined up for us. A little bit quickly about him. Dr. Roop Gursahani is consultant neurologist, PD Hinduja Hospital, Mumbai. And he specially came here today to talk to us about end-of-life care. And he is also member steering committee of ELICIT, which is End-of-Life Care in India Task Force. So he will today speak to us all about death, dying, and advanced care planning. So over to you, Dr. Roop, without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you both to Nidhi and Reshmi, and also to Rajni and Vikram and Nagesh for the various roles that they've played in my trip here today. Right. So let me start off by showing you two panels here. Both of these popped up on my social media some time ago. The first says in Hindi, both birth and death have become expensive. You cannot be born without a cesarean and you can't die without a ventilator. And at the same time, in London, advanced medical directives are being promoted on buses. If tomorrow everything changes, leave no doubt. We heard that about the will as well, the estate will. So why is this so? In some ways, we are ahead of the rest of the world in digital finance, not too far behind in communications, medical technology, actually, really. But we are 4 decades behind in how we manage death and dying. But after January 24 this year, things have changed, and I am pretty much optimistic about the future. Part of this presentation is to make sure that I can recruit you in making sure that this happens. So if you can think of going on a trip, would you like to plan it? Would you like info, travel about stay and so on? Yes, you would. Once upon a time, I could jump into a bus for some distant destination, not worry about my seats, restrooms along the way, or a place to stay when I reached. Not now. I want all this sorted out before I get onto that bus. Now, you can either take some of the responsibility for planning this journey, or you can do what the Lavates did or didn't do actually. I think it is a little weird. They actually wrote to the president saying, we want a helicopter to evacuate us to heaven. If you look at this stage of life realistically, you realize that there are some things that most of us want and are actually attainable. For starters, most of us want to pass away in our own bed at home, though currently the majority of deaths actually occur in hospital. To know how this can be planned for, we need to figure out how people die and how predictable that can be. If you think you can wish for a sudden death, that is not really realistic. After the age of 50, only about 7% of people die suddenly, unexpectedly. Somebody is well, functional, and poof, they're gone. You really need to have a lot of punya, like President Abdul Kalam, to get that kind of a death. He died very suddenly. And that stands to reason. All the risky things that people do, they finish by the time they're 50. Think of soldiers, terrorists, ad executives smoking their lungs out, dowry deaths, whatever. By the age of 50, all of that is over. Really. For people in their 60s, cancer is the big killer, and it accounts for about 20% of all deaths. It has a very defined trajectory once chemotherapies have failed. So, in a sense, when Manohar Parrikar returned to Goa, most people understand that, and he probably himself, definitely knew that he did not have much time left. But for people with chronic illnesses, various organs start to fail, and this happens in the late 60s and 70s. And here you get what you call a looping trajectory. These are ill people, not fully functional, and they're declining with every crisis and admission. For example, Vilasrao Deshmukh died of liver failure waiting for a transplant. You would think that after the second or third admission, they would have figured out what is happening to them, or the doctors would have told them. Neither happens, in my experience. For the lucky 50% of us who reach the age of 80 years, our functionality is going to be low and will keep on dwindling, often with dementia and with ill health. Atal Bihari lost the 2004 elections and then vanished after a stroke. And we realized only when he passed away in 2018. And then there are those who don't die but don't live either. Michael Schumacher retired from racing and then had that ski accident which left him severely brain damaged. This happened almost 10 years ago. This trajectory is an artifact of modern intensive care. It rescues people who would almost certainly have died 20 or 30 years ago. So if you look at these trajectories, you realize that death is largely predictable. And if you're looking for a good death, you can understand the essential components. The first is knowledge, to know when death is coming and to understand what can be expected, because then you have the time to say goodbye and perhaps control the timing. Autonomy, so that you get control, dignity, privacy over where death occurs and whose presence. And finally, you avoid or at least limit suffering from pain, because you can control symptoms, have access to spiritual and emotional care. But there are three major problems, and they almost are a reverse obverse of what I just said. The first is we are not willing to talk about death. And that actually takes away opportunities for last wishes and for an emotional settling of accounts. That's really crucial to a good death. You can only go in peace once you've settled all of this. Our systems do not permit patients and families to take control. Doctors are scared of making decisions to withdraw futile care, so the default option is ventilator. And we have poor access to systems that control suffering at the end. We have 1% of the palliative care physicians population of India here in this room, 2 of them, literally. So think of the last journey of your life. If we come back to the journey metaphor, who has the information, who is planning, and whose responsibility is to plan? Now, you thought your friendly neighborhood doctor, pilot, would give you travel updates. No, I'm a doctor. Patients expect us to prognosticate, which means foresee and foretell, honestly, accurately, but also optimistically. And you will yourself realize that is an impossible triad, and without being trained in how to do this, doctors cannot do this. And let me assure you, in India today, it's just now that this skill is being trained. Nobody has it. Nobody's been trained. So, patients do want to know, but they also think that the doctor should broach this topic. So it doesn't happen. We end up with don't ask and don't tell. Right? So let's get back to this. If you do get the information, say a clear diagnosis, say like cancer, and becomes obvious that treatments are not working, then who plans? You, someone you trust, or default mode, which means nobody plans. And the worst suffering happens when there is nobody willing or able to make decisions, because to minimize suffering, you need to take some kind of control, or somebody needs to take control. Now, it's important to understand that if you can speak coherently, you decide, and your choices and decisions always come first, regardless of what anybody tells you. So, whose responsibility is it to plan and decide? I am an autonomous individual. Isn't that a Western concept? Not really. What about our web of relationships? Even in close-knit families, I think we still have a fair share of both the right and the responsibility to decide. And this also presupposes that we have the decision-making capacity. Now, that actually is lost once the dying process begins. Once the body starts to decline, we call it active dying, and that can be as short as days. In cancer, it can be days to weeks. And in people who have organ failure, that looping trajectory, they cycle in and out. They cycle in. And if somebody has dementia, then they lose it years before death actually arrives. So the first thing that you have to do is to figure out who can help you with this responsibility. And it need not be a family member. Typically, there are many people who told me that we don't want to involve our families because we know that out of love, they will not let things happen. So, but anyway, I mean, you could still do that. You have to choose 3 decision makers. They are not a committee. They are in order of preference. If one is not available, then the next. Typically, people talk to each other, but one person has that responsibility at a given time. The next decision is the location of care. Now, no ICU doctor I know wants to die in his own ICU. This is because they know what it means. Lights on constantly, there's beeping, sounds going on, and masked people are doing strange and painful things to you, and actually making jokes about it while they're doing it. So remember that. But sometimes people do want to go to hospital, at least because they find it difficult to handle these things at home, with a clear understanding that they won't go into the ICU. For cancer, we have hospices, but not for non-cancer diagnosis. And ideally, it should be home, with palliative and end-of-life care set up so that you get a seamless web of service that encompasses patient, family, and community. And there are parts of the country where this does happen. This is important to decide because if you don't want life-saving treatments, then you don't need to go to hospital. And you have a right to refuse life-sustaining treatment because they can save lives, but often they just prolong the dying process. So what are these life-saving treatments? Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, ventilation, IV fluids, tube feeding. Dialysis and chemotherapy you can understand, but many doctors even find it difficult to accept that tube feeding also is a life-saving treatment which you can refuse. But the most important to understand is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Now, we as doctors often undergo training in CPR because this is a rescue procedure for someone who has a sudden cardiac arrest. If it happens to somebody who is otherwise okay, for instance, the guy playing golf, the outcome really depends on where it happens. Overall, only about 10% do well because not everybody has the luck to have a doctor and an ambulance standing by when it happens. If it does happen in hospital because they are in hospital for some other illness, the heart gets restarted quite often, and 40% about should survive in a good hospital. But if it happens in somebody who's already dying, does this procedure make any sense? No, it doesn't. And that is important to understand because it's not a nice, gentle procedure. In a frail, elderly person, it breaks ribs. You can hear them cracking when we do it. So all in all, a much better idea is to pass away at home, as US presidents seem to make a habit of. Barbara and George Bush did that, and you know Jimmy Carter is also at home. He's clearly decided he will not go to hospital again. So for all of this, you need a document, but also a system to make it work. And you need us all to be death literate, especially including doctors. The system is called advanced care planning, and it's a process to guide decision-making about your health care. If and when you do not have the capacity to decide for yourself, you figured that out. It has 2 very clear components: deciding a proxy decision maker and providing the guidance for that proxy decision maker. And that guidance can be as extensive or as short as you want it to be. This is the sample document that our group has worked on, and you will see the sites on which it is easily available. You can download it, and you can actually use it quite easily. And one of them is, of course, the Indian Association of Palliative Care, but it's also Pallium India and so on. And But the important thing to understand is that it begins as a conversation between you, your family, and or your proxy, if they are not the same, and your doctor. But actually, most people now worldwide believe that rather than doctors, it is better to have counselors or facilitators who are actually trained for this. And across Australia and parts, much of the developed world, this has become, in a sense, a community responsibility. There are people who take this job on. Once this is done, this document then goes into your medical record. If and when you lack the capacity to be your own decision maker, this gets used to make sure that your wishes are followed. And as you can imagine, for people who do not, or for various reasons, are estranged from biologic family, having a proxy decision maker is absolutely crucial. So when do you do this? Actually, with a new diagnosis of something that could become life-threatening, cancer is obvious. But even if you're hospitalized with a serious illness after the age of 75, or if you're older and you're now beginning to require more support, say if you need someone to help you go out of the house, as simple as that. But actually, essentially any time, because like the estate will, it always seems too soon until it is too late. So anytime. But essentially, if you're otherwise healthy, young or not, if catastrophic brain injury is something that worries you, make it now. If you remember what happened to Schumacher. For instance, Barack Obama made this and announced it during his first presidency. I suppose because the US president has an occupational hazard of being shot in the head. But Schumacher had an inherently risky profession, and I wonder if he never thought this was something that could happen to him. I wonder. For someone in their 60s, I think even if you have a new diagnosis of blood pressure or diabetes, which is not easily controlled, think about this. For instance, I had this patient who had a new diagnosis of hypertension, and then she developed this massive brain hemorrhage. And she came into the ICU, she got a surgery done, which actually saved her life. She survived, but she was paralyzed on the left side. She needed help for everything. She could feed herself with the right hand, she could speak. But that was it. And literally, as soon as she was well, she kept asking her husband, why did you have me operated? In fact, a brother who was a doctor came down the day after the surgery, and he was upset. He said, why did you operate? And as you can realize, I still see the wife, because the husband passed away. It's not an easy life now for her. So this, of course, can go further. And when the end is in sight, when somebody has a higher than 50% chance of passing away in less than a year, then it becomes crucial to go on and do this. Now, in my experience in India, this knowledge is communicated only in cancer. And that's because cancer, once the word is out there, it's there. But even there, it's usually communicated to the family, sometimes to the patient, and almost never in any non-cancer diagnosis. Almost never. So, 3 famous nonagenarians passed on in 2018 and then one in 2022. We've already spoken about the Bushes. They took charge of their own last days and their system worked for them. How does the system work? Well, after what has happened? After an advanced medical directive is made, then you have these physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. These forms are filled up. If you see this form in detail, they specify exactly what should be done in an emergency. For instance, if somebody is found unconscious in the kitchen and emergency services come in. Remember that the AMD tells your wishes, but that is not easily accessible and people can't read through that form. So these are brightly colored, multiple copies which go everywhere, in the records, on the fridge door, and so on. Most importantly, are signed both by the patient or the proxy and the doctor, so they are effectively orders for the paramedics. And the paramedics are protected if they follow them. And these really make sure that your wishes are followed. In India, we have a legally validated do not attempt resuscitation order, which again has patient or patient representative and doctor signatures, not as detailed as the previous one, but good enough for our purposes. Let me warn you, most doctors Indian doctors are not aware of this. And so don't be surprised if they are surprised if you tell them about this. Right? Remember that if you say no CPR, it also means no ventilator, because CPR is almost always followed by artificial ventilation. What if you change your mind? You're in hospital and you decide, no, I want to wait till my daughter's wedding next year or whatever. Yeah. These documents can be revoked orally. They can only be made in writing, but they can be revoked orally instantly. And if you're awake and can communicate, the doctor or whoever is there is supposed to ask you, this is your directive. Do you want us to follow it? And you say, no. Over. So I have been involved with this issue since the Aruna Shanbag case in 2011, because I was on the medical panel that examined her. And in 2015, 3 national medical associations, the neurologists, the intensivists and the palliative care people came together to try and do our bit to reforming end-of-life care in India. We were able to make a medico-legal coalition. The late Advocate Girish Gokhale of DSK Legal was our first pillar of support, and after him, Dr. Dhwani Mehta of Vidhi Legal and the senior advocate Arvind Datar carried us over the finish line earlier this year. But we were also extremely lucky that the Supreme Court of India in 2017-18 decided to haul and repurpose the liberty of the Constitution and bring it to individual autonomy through these 3 judgments. And they are, in a sense, really interconnected. We are, of course, concerned with the judgment on health autonomy, and it's important to understand that this judgment is the law of the land. It says that a person has every right to refuse any or all treatment, even at the risk of death, and that you can do this in advance. But unfortunately, in the original judgment, they made the procedure too complicated and bureaucratic, partly because the judges were wary of making a law. So they wanted government to take over from this point on and actually make the law. As always, as you can expect, nothing happened. And we kept having these intermittent news reports of some legal person or the other actually making their advanced medical directive. But I think maybe about 4 or 5 got made in the whole country. We tried. We couldn't do it. Until January this year, when finally the Supreme Court simplified the procedure. And to make it valid, you use this form or any form, and it has to be signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary or a gazetted government official who has to attest it. Once this is done, well, obviously it is effective. But to actually make it work, you have to start talking. And for any of you who needs conversation prompts or how to get this going, we'll have these resources up on the BIC website and you'll be able to see those. But the conversation project is a very, very easy thing to use. And then you make multiple copies, inform everybody, inform your doctors. In fact, whenever you go to any doctor, if you have it, take it along. You'll find out if the doctor understands and knows what to do about it. But why is this all so important? And I'd like to leave you with this image. This is because, especially if it is a non-cancer illness, where literally you have to make a decision about when enough is enough. Remember that we now have the means to keep the body alive indefinitely should we choose to do so. The Bushes died at home in their own beds, literally in Darbar. Poor Atal Bihari died on something called extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Think of a 95-year-old sustained on that for 10, 15 days. I can't imagine. And Lata Mangeshkar, those incomparable vocal cords were raped twice. So my rule is that if you're an Indian VIP, you will be tortured before death. Sorry. Right. My email ID is also there, and if anybody is interested, obviously the presentation is up and available for you. Thank you again for the attention.
So thank you for that presentation, and thank you for joining us, Dr. Nagesh. We'll have very basic questions for you, which, of course, many of you here are aware, as you just showed us. But many of us may be completely unaware of what is end-of-life care, what is advanced care planning. And that's the first question. Why is there, we know about every available medical treatment that there is, but why don't we know about this? Why is there such little awareness on this topic?
I don't know. I think it's partly something cultural. I think it's also because who's going to put money into this business? So you could call it the medical industrial complex that is not interested in this. But I like to think that it's also something painful. Even as doctors, for me, when I began speaking about this, and this is my mentor in that, it takes a little bit of courage to go up and say, sorry, this is it. It doesn't come easy.
And I think the additional part of it is that it took a very, very long time for a sensible directive from the Supreme Court. We've been struggling with this for a very, very long time. And in fact, you can go on the website of the Supreme Court and there are recorded of proceedings. And if you do listen to the proceedings when this judgment came up, I was sitting on my computer and watching the live streaming. And the lawyer from the government side was talking such nonsense that I started screaming using expletives in Marathi, because I'm basically from Mumbai. And my wife came running to the room and said, "What's wrong with you?" "I'm sorry, I can't use those words here, okay?" And I said, "What is this guy doing?" Okay. So it took a very long time. So the legal advisors to the corporate hospitals particularly, they're right. We've dealt with so many of these guys during our 7-8 years of work on illicit, right? So, and government is really not interested because of the fact that somebody might say, somebody is sitting there, they are encouraging people, to die and they'll bump you off and all that stuff. So I think what Roop said, bottom line is it's cultural. But at some point of time, things have to give way. And that has actually happened in January this year.
I'll just expand on that. Politicians will not do anything until their voters tell them they're interested in it. So until the voters, politicians.
It's working.
Yeah, so again, until voters tell politicians that this is important, it's not good.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Because you mentioned culturally, when we were researching on this, we did realize that in Western countries, there are discussions around death. There are structured ways to approach the topic because, as Dr. Roop just said, it's a difficult conversation for anybody. In India, how would you advise people to approach a conversation on death? A common person who would like maybe, her parents or her family to think on this, for the elders at home, for oneself. How would you advise?
First of all, you as a person should want to do that. I think that is one of the biggest impediments, right? And then, of course, culturally, everybody says, don't talk about death, all that stuff. But I think what would be required is that you sit down with the people at home, okay, and say, look, I'd like to discuss these things with you. Now, if you're the person who would like to discuss with your family that you would like or not like certain things to be done to you, that's one. But the second more important thing is that if you've got aged parents, and what is, of course, catastrophic death is a totally different matter altogether. But take, for example, dementia and such other things, where for sure that this person's ability to make decisions is going. Now, funnily, the Mental Health Act came much before this Supreme Court judgment. And in the Mental Health Act, there is a provision for you to appoint what they call as a durable power of attorney. But this did not happen. So how do you actually go about it? I mean, that's a totally different thing about it. But I think it has to be done over multiple sessions with the family. you're going to get people who will suddenly say, oh, no, don't talk about this, this is inauspicious and all that stuff. Like, you ask somebody, my father used to ask me, a lot of youngsters, have you written your will? And then he would say, uncle, why so soon, sort of thing. So, but if you really want to, somebody wants to engage in a conversation, either with the seniors to say, look, we need to understand, it can be done, but it requires a certain amount of guidance and training.
Ideally, I think it's partly the media's responsibility. It was in Kerala, the way it really, it just ruled the airwaves for a period of time. That's because Mathrubhumi ran it. They made a campaign out of it. Sorry. So, Manorama ran that campaign, and because of that campaign, well, it was there. I mean, you saw it in the paper and you brought it up at the dinner table and people spoke about it. So we do need media to get on board.
But I'm just thinking, are there any stats available on how many people actually have drafted their living wills in India?
At the moment, absolutely none. This is because, sorry, you, so, yeah, so great. That's great to know. But at this moment, I mean, we expect that this will be a rolling ball. It will pick up speed as time goes on, as people get more and more aware. But at the moment, no.
Okay.
And again, we are not going to have, the way it is now, we are not going to have a central directory of it, so we are never going to know.
You want to add something?
Yeah,
Dr.
so the other important thing is this, many times person could ask as to how effective is my advance directive going to be? Because of the fact that, would doctors listen to me or not? They're always worried, whether it's... So the culture of what an advance directive is it legally binding? Theoretically, yes. According to the law, it is legally binding. But what happens if, the relatives make a big noise outside? Then you take the path of least resistance. Okay, doctors don't, forget about advance directive. Relatives will tell doctors not to tell the patient. At Karnataka, 25% of our patients who get admitted don't know about their diagnosis or the state of the disease because the relatives have prevented the doctor from doing that. So it's going to be a very slow process in evolution. But everything has to happen. And it has to start somewhere.
True. So I'm just curious here, since you said, you were showing the trajectory that various ailments can have, and you spoke about dementia, that it can take as long as 10 to 15 years, right? At what stage can a person who's been diagnosed with dementia can really get started with the whole process? When is it considered legally viable?
Right, so we do have ways of determining somebody's decision-making capacity. And if you made a diagnosis of dementia, it's been communicated to the person, if it's been communicated to the patient, and the patient, it's actually my responsibility to inform them that they have the right to make this kind of a document and make their choices. It's about early dementia. You need to specifically find out if they understand this, if they can make choices, and if they can communicate these choices. If they can do that, sure enough, they can make it. But a neurologist would actually have to certify this. But remember that before dementia begins, there's a stage, we call it mild cognitive impairment, where people lose memory. And that goes on for quite a period of time. During that time, you have the ability to make your decisions. And at this stage, today, you can confirm that the disease has begun. And when somebody comes to me in that stage, I always ask them, do you want to do this now? I think you'd better do it now.
But this question you asked to the patient.
I suggest it.
Okay. So, Dr. Nagesh, I think end-of-life care discussion is incomplete if you do not talk about palliative care. Would you like to explain to us what palliative care is and when should one consider it?
I might go on till tomorrow morning. Okay. So if I can put it very simply, palliative care is the active and total care of a person whose illness or disease has gone beyond cure. It includes the care of that person, it includes care of the family members, and it also includes care of the professional caregivers. It is active and total, and therefore, that, as they say in Kannada, ayo papa, that sort of thing is not there. Okay? It conserves the dignity of the individual, it respects the values of that person, and finally, it has to be non-judgmental. Now, this is where I get into trouble at home, because I sometimes pass judgment on a lot of things to my wife, and she says, you're a palliative care person, you should be non-judgmental. So, but that's what palliative care is all about. And it comes from the Latin word pallium, which means to cover or to cloak or to envelope.
So for me, it became a mental pivot when I realized that there were so many things I could cure, but I could still care. And once that became obvious, it was like, isn't this something that I'm supposed to be doing? But too often, doctors, once they realize they cannot cure, they literally say, "Ab main kuch nahi kar sakta." That is not something a doctor is ever supposed to say.
And if I might also add that traditionally, even today, the doctors are trained in such a way that they think that it is a case of, it is a disease that has to be cured, it's a battle to be fought, and if the person dies, then you have lost the battle. That is basically the whole thing, So, but luckily things are changing. It may take many years for it to actually to see about it. But the Medical Council or the National Medical Commission has come out with what is known as 8 comms: attitude, ethics, and communication. There's a standard protocol of what you should be teaching students in the first MBBS, like respect for the cadaver and so on and so forth. And as you go to the second, third, and fourth year, there are topics that need to be taught to the students, particularly in the area of communication. How do you break bad news? How do you deal with denial? How do you deal with collusion? It's a very interesting subject. Now they are insisting on these things being taught to the medical students. But now,
how effective it is, in times of desperation, when a parent, according to the family, the parent needs treatment, the doctor is seen as God, the last hope for people. And very often, from what you are saying, from what we are hearing, the medical fraternity itself are not aware of many of these things. So how does one approach that? How do you battle that?
see, first of all, if you're trained in communication skills, then it will become very easy for you. Okay? Now, I've been teaching communication skills for more than 25 years. And I'm proud to say that Rup Gursani is one of my students. Okay? No, we worked together for a long time. It's not so difficult. It's not so difficult. It's not a nice thing to do. You don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to break bad news to 5 guys. I'm going to enjoy it. Obviously not. But if you know how to handle it, would a patient be happy if he's given bad news and he'll sing and dance and say, yay, I got this? No. But how do you handle those issues? And you have to do that in such a way. And I can tell you one thing. Lots of research has been done, and our experience in Karnataka, people will remember how you treated their loved one when you were looking after them. It's not whether you cure them or not. Or even if you got well, right, how did you treat them? How did you talk to them? Did you respect that person as an individual? Okay, that is what is important. And that is woefully missing in the medical community. Now, I'm not a saint. If I go back 30 years and if I remember some of the statements that I made, including in Tata Memorial Hospital, I won't tell you with whom I worked, okay? It'll be embarrassing. I am ashamed of myself even today.
That's a very honest confession. And I think it takes a lot of courage to say that. So, yeah, I think that does deserve that applause. So I'm just wondering, I actually had this, a real-time situation where a friend approached me a few years ago. His father was, in the last stage of dementia, and he was pretty much bedridden. And he reached out to me asking, "Can you help me identify palliative care facilities for my father?" And it's anybody's guess that I actually couldn't find any facility which takes care of dementia patients. It's primarily cancer patients who have access to that. Why is that?
So it's a little interesting. You know, when palliative care began, it began in the 1960s. People realized that they needed a specialty which went from medical to social to psychological to spiritual, took everything into account. And because, remember, you can't have one single person to do all of these things. Ideally, you need a medical doctor who understands all of this. So it took time for this specialty to grow and evolve. Cancer was the obvious immediate target. Cancer patients are awake till the end and they have pain, physical pain, humongous physical pain. So palliative care started with cancer. And in India, when palliative care began, it essentially was NGOs. In some ways, one of my palliative care colleagues actually made a bit of a joke out of it. She said that if I run an NGO, I have a budget for a patient. My commitment is limited. And if the patient's span fits that, then it works. So for an NGO, patient, commitment, budget, all in together. Doesn't happen in neurology. You can look at the examples I quoted you. Life can go on endlessly and there are decisions that have to be made. So for legacy palliative care to move outside cancer, it's just begun about 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago. The first neurologists who decided that they needed to learn palliative care were in the US in when? 2000s. In some ways, I started about 5 years ago. And even today, I mean, if I talk to my neurology colleagues, there are only about 4 or 5 of us who are interested. But what we need to do is actually make sure that regular palliative care is able to take care of neurology patients as well. But more importantly, diffuse this learning within the community. Because so much of this can be done by volunteers. So much of it can be done by non-medical people. So obviously, that's the other hat that I wear, other than the advanced care planning, and that's neuropalliative.
Yeah. So if I can also add, this year in February, Karnataka had hosted the Indian Association of Palliative Care International Conference. And we talked about, the theme was Metamorphosis, the emergence of subspecialty palliative medicine. So we had sessions for cardiology, neurology, critical care, pulmonology, neurology. Now, for example, we've got, two wonderful specimens of humanity here in this room. Not I. This guy for neurology and Rajni Bhatt for pulmonology. They're crazy people. Amongst their their community, And I've seen Rajni so many times in conferences. She's up and she's livid with rage. Her Oxford English comes out tinged with a little bit of American accent. And she goes crazy because people don't understand. So it is going to take time. Now the public must demand.
Yes.
Tomorrow, if a doctor does not talk to you properly, you say, hey, you know what? You have not offered me palliative care. I'm going to sue you.
So, we don't have much time and we would like to open this up to questions. But one quick question before that. What would be some misconceptions which are associated with palliative care that you have come across, both of you?
I think you should first start.
So the first is to think that palliative care means end-of-life care. No, it doesn't. If I see a patient with dementia or motor neuron disease, how I communicate the diagnosis now is very different from what I used to do earlier. Because my palliative care skills now come out. Okay, and then my business is to make sure that that person's and that person's family's quality of life is maintained as much as possible, as long as possible. Right? Of course, death will eventually come. It's not my business to, fight over the patient's body with Yamdut. My business is to complete the handover with grace and dignity. And to do that, I think this is something that all doctors have to learn. And patients and doctors, everybody should remember that when the word palliative care is uttered, it doesn't mean end of life care. That's a very important part of what we do, but it's actually a small part.
Actually, when we teach, people ask when should palliative care start? The answer is at the time of diagnosis. Now, tomorrow someone may turn around and say, hey, if you start, it means you're really a lousy doctor because all the patients who come to you are gone, No. I say that in the initial stages, compassionate communication, giving information in a way they can understand, taking care of, their concerns, their spiritual concerns, and giving them a safe space to ventilate. Right. And unfortunately, in cancer, 75% of patients reach the doctor for the first time when it's advanced. Right? But in all of the conditions. Now, in the case of, say, for example, pulmonology, if you look at interstitial lung disease or some of these other conditions, I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it taxes the people. So, palliative care, and there are lots of myths that are there in the minds of the public. For example, that morphine is addictive, that morphine causes respiratory depression. All kinds of things are there, But things are changing. But the biggest thing that prevents palliative care from being really moved around, I lay it squarely at the foot of the doctor. Because unless and until he realizes, a lot of people think that palliative care guys are scavengers, they come and do the dirty work afterwards, break the bad news and sort out other things. Make a palliative care guy a part of your team. You give the inputs, particularly, say, in neurology or pulmonology or even cardiology. And he will help you with your difficult conversations. And if I work, say, with Roop only, I'll pick up a lot of neurology myself. Or if I work with Rajni, I'll pick up pulmonology. So that's where it's important.
I'll just add one little more point. And that is that most of us are used to private healthcare. And private healthcare is literally pay as you go. When you pay for a cardiologist to put in a stent, you really don't bat an eyelid at the fees that they charge. But when palliative care does the talking and the holding the hand and all that, it's not valued. So one thing that we've learned is that palliative care works only when hospital managements or governments recognize the need and actually make this service work as a salaried service. It just doesn't work as a consultative service.
Very true point. Before we open to questions, sorry, I have to ask you this because this is something which I had learned in my conversation, pre-discussions that we had, when I was telling you about a real case scenario which came to us, where we were approached by a senior citizen who was suffering post-COVID symptoms and was in a desperate state. And he asked us about, can I end my life? I don't like this suffering. I don't want this suffering. And he had actually asked for this was still on Zoom. So he had asked for a, session where his family was included, where I was there, where a legal advisor was there. In fact, Mr. Shiv Kumar was there. And the whole discussion was around, can I do something? I don't want to lead this life. And there was one very interesting thing that I learned from you that day, and I want you to tell us about that.
So two aspects to this. One is that we believe that if this wish is because of suffering, then suffering can be tackled. A good palliative care physician should be able to do the best possible to make that suffering manageable. That's one. But the second is somebody has a diagnosis which is eventually going to lead to death. Then we are actually still about 20 or 30 years away from that. What we term euthanasia, we use that for a very specific. That is possible only in pretty advanced democracies of the West, Netherlands and so on. The only place where it is permitted for non-citizens is Switzerland, and there's an organization called Dignitas that does that, but they do due diligence to make sure that you have a diagnosis that is going to cause death. So I think the gentleman that you speak of wouldn't also fall into Dignitas's criteria.
Thank you for sharing that. We are open for questions now.
Good evening, sir. Good evening. Thank you very much for your entire information. But I read the entire guidelines published by Supreme Court. In that, it says that primary medical board and secondary medical board is to be established. Now, as a caretaker, what is that I need to tell to the hospital, how they are going to respond, and how it has to be handled?
So, very good question that is there. We have to work with individual state governments. Okay. Now, I met the Commissioner of Health of Karnataka. Perhaps Mr. Shiv Kumar has got a lot of influence. We'll discuss offline. No. You meet people, you know people. You should nudge it from the other side. Okay. Tomorrow, if I am running a hospital, I need to approach the government and say, this is the Supreme Court judgment. The primary committee is no problem at all. As far as the secondary committee is concerned, one of those 3 doctors have to be nominated by the chief medical officer or equivalent. Yes. Now, when this argument was going on in the court, the constitutional bench headed by Justice Joseph, our lawyers, particularly Senior Advocate Arvind Datar, said that in the case of certifying brain death, okay, there is already a pre-approved panel by the government, right, from various hospitals. They're there. So I know that you are in that hospital. I call you for my thing. You call me or my doctor for your thing. They were not willing. They kept on insisting. No. The chief medical officer should. That's the time when I started using foul Marathi, watching the thing on my computer. I have talked to the commissioner. We wield a little more influence with the state of Odisha, where we are also working. And probably on the 18th, I'm meeting the health secretary. I've already submitted. And we have created a draft. Okay. The End of Life Care Task Force has created a draft, thanks to Dhwani Mehta and the other people, that how the government can frame rules to say how a chief medical officer or equivalent can go about appointing that person or a panel of people who can then go and be a member of that secondary committee.
So basically, you understand the Supreme Court has given a judgment. They have not made rules. They're very clear. They're not in the business of.
It's only a guidelines, but not a law.
We have to. So we are.
It is not a law at all.
It's not a law,
but rules.
Doing that. It's something that has yet to happen.
Yes. Sorry, for the first time, I think the medical profession and the lawyer profession are on the same side of the table. Otherwise, we've always been fighting the medical profession and consumer court all the time. But just a few points, 4 of them actually. The Supreme Court, the context of the Supreme Court judgment was not the context of end of life. It was in the context of euthanasia. The broad subject was euthanasia, and they distinguished between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. Active euthanasia, they said, we will not allow in this country because it means active taking of life. But passive euthanasia is where all the living will and so on and so forth. Para 28 of the judgment, the Supreme Court refused to recognize the concept of a living will. They said the counsel for the respondents has continuously been using the word living will. That needs to be defined under statute. Therefore, we will convert that into advanced medical directive. So technically speaking, the concept of a living will as understood in the United States and so on does not exist in India. We are constantly looking at AMD. Now, my experience by dealing with this at not this kind of an audience, not this kind of an educated audience, of an audience that is aware of its rights. Let's move to the next level. The fear of misuse of AMD is a very, very relevant factor. The uneducated sector, the poor sector, the families that we talk about, who have no clue about what the law is, there is a scare of misuse because of duress and so on and so forth. The second thing that the Supreme Court has again laid down is that a person can give an advanced medical directive only if he is in a sound state of mind. They have converted it into a contract under the Contract Act. Now, if I enter into a contract with you for the purchase of your house, you must be in a sound state of mind and understand the consequences of your action. They have transported that clause into this. Now look at how wide this clause is. What has happened in a few cases which we are dealing with is, the children and the other people have gone to the court saying that this advanced medical directive was not made when he was in a sound state of mind. Now, who establishes it? Doctor has already talked about it, neurological opinion and so on and so forth. But we, being lawyers that we are constantly arguing that in spite of a medical opinion, I will tell you that this is what he did. It was not in a sound state of mind. So this is the second aspect that we are constantly fighting in the court. Third, in the lower state of society, we have a very extraordinary phenomena that is prevalent. People who come to us and we talk to them about making an advanced medical directive, you know their response? Sir, man karma. I am destined to go through this. And it goes a step further. You understand Kannada? Yes. All of you? Okay. If I terminate my life, ಈ ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಮುಂದಿನ ಜನ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ನಮಗೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವೇನು ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಡೋಣ? This is the next problem that we are facing. And the last unique problem that we are facing is, families tell these guys, no problem, sir, please make your advanced medical directives. I have no problem. But there's a caveat. Make a will of your properties first, then you do that. There is a difference between the will as we understand it in respect of our properties and the living will as we talk about, but the advanced medical directives. In half a dozen of these cases, the children have come and said, sure, sir, no problem, let them make the AMD, but first make this will. So these are ground realities that we are faced with.
So, of course, if I have to have a repartee with my learned friend, then we will be here till tomorrow morning.
Day after tomorrow also.
Okay, but he's got a point. There's no argument about it. What we are trying to say is that when you look at what is the situation in intensive care units, okay, enormous amount of work has been done and there have been multiple papers that have been presented. And in fact, I'm going to Bombay. Roop is also coming for that meeting where we are going to re-look at the guidelines. The Critical Care Society and the Palliative Care Association is sitting down to discuss about re-look at the thing. What the Supreme Court primarily has done, in fact, I'm not too bothered about advanced directive or advanced will, frankly speaking. Okay, although Roop gave a brilliant presentation. It doesn't matter to me. As far as poor people are concerned, it's very easy for me to bump off somebody, whether he is rich or poor. All that I have to do is when nobody is looking, I just put a little bit of potassium chloride into the vein and your heart will stop in diastole. So all this is bullshit. Sorry. Okay. Point is very well taken. There is a fear. What is happening right now is that when you put a patient comes to the ICU, and you really don't know, like a neurological patient of his, you don't know what is the diagnosis. You've not done a CT, MRI, whatever. So what you do is you put the person on ventilator, and then you get all the investigation. Then you look. And then after that, over multiple sessions of discussion, right, that person is gone for all practical purposes. We have multiple conversations with the family. Now, this Supreme Court judgment has facilitated that. That, according to me, is more important. Otherwise, there are stories where, in fact, I heard from my good friend Kishore Rao, my colleague at Karnataka, our chairman, of an instance, where a patient, was told that, they don't want to continue. They said, okay, we'll shift that person to another hospital where the doctor understands. And to the bad luck of that patient, when that, taken to that other hospital, there was a young doctor who was there who again intubated over there. Okay. So how do I withdraw? Right. So then what happens is the corporate medical advisor will say, no, don't do that. So what you do, you take the patient outside the compound of the hospital, you extubate, stop the ventilator, he dies a painful death outside. It's not in my hospital. And then you bring him back into the casualty and certify him as death. So that is the best part of this Supreme Court judgment. Okay, whether you don't do advanced directive, you do advanced directive, to my mind, it affects a very, very, very small part of the population. But if it is important to you, please talk to your family. But I would not be bothered to make a public thing about it, frankly, at this point of time.
I think I completely agree with Dr. Nagesh that rather than the paperwork about it, what is the most important part is the conversations. And as a doctor, what has been the most heartening thing for me is that, well, I've always been someone who, if there is consensus in a family, that's the medically, ethically right thing to do. If there's withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment, that's fine. So when you're doing ethical, medically correct treatment, I'm not afraid of doing what's right in medicine at all. But there are many who were fearful. What this decision did, what this ruling did, is it's taken away fear from so many other doctors, younger doctors, who thought that it was illegal. It was never illegal. Consensus is the important thing. If all the children know what their mom and dad want. My parents have blessed me with speaking about death and dying for over a decade. I know exactly what their wishes are, down to what last rites they wanted, what donations they wanted, bodies to be donated to medical colleges. All of this, I've carried this knowledge for over 10 years. And I cannot tell you what a gift it is to me from my parents, knowing that I can always do exactly what their wishes are. So the conversations and the fact that this has opened up conversations between doctors and patients and within our community. That is the greatest gift of this ruling.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Rajni. And that is, sorry, we have been asked to close the session now because it's time. Can?
Good evening. Is dementia preventable? If it is preventable, what are the methods?
So this is not this is not related to the topic here today. So we will have to have another session on that, on dementia specifically. Yeah. Sorry. One last question in the back.
So I just wanted to ask this lovely, hearing you all. So I heard the policymakers and practitioners talk. Now, when I reflect as a common citizen, what can I do to embed access and availability to end life care in the policy? What can I do? How can I help? Great question. I know it's a very complicated question.
Make me a member of the Rajya Sabha, I will work for you.
Well.
No, but I think, if you look around for opportunities, you go back to that earlier session where people look for, where they spoke about purpose and so on. This is a huge purpose.
Absolutely.
And look around. You will, once you're aware of this, you will see these opportunities popping up all around you. This is something that we don't have enough volunteers for.
Thank you.
And to my mind, I think what Dr. Rajni pointed out, I think even opening up to those conversations at dinner tables to figure out what I want or what my parents want, having that kind of clarity and with no kind of stigma attached to it, with no kind of, why are we talking about this? Do you have an ulterior motive there? As soon as we have that clarity within our own families, I think that's the job done. Right? Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here today. Thank you so much.